long time. So I about how a conversation would go. But I'm glad you've taken the step and you've come to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I think it's a sign of the times that we are living in. There is a lot of polarization, and that is what I think drives skepticism. And there is labeling of one another as one thing or the other. So I think that's what causes the skepticism, I believe.
And I think you've done things which resulted in labeling, and journalists are always labeled. So and especially women journalists. So I'm kind of used to the labeling. It doesn't get easy.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, years and years in the profession, when you get labeled, there are people who tend to say that you should have a thick skin, you should have the skin of an alligator, but it doesn't happen. And I'm guessing as an activist, you also you couldn't develop alligator skin. We are humans.
No, not at all. And especially like when we talk about social media, in the age of social media, all of the criticism, you can actually see it. Earlier, before social media, even if people were criticizing you, you couldn't see it. I mean, maybe you would hear something secondhand, but now it's directly, there is a very sort of ontological immediacy to it. It's very immediate. It's directed at you. You are tagged in it. You can see it. And initially, I used to take it in my stride, but eventually it affected me psychologically. And when I realized that, that's when I started to, in stages. I mean, it was very difficult to get rid of social media, but yeah, I had to do that for my own sanity.
So your life it's a very interesting life. You've led a young life, but still you've gone through various stages which
Yes.
people take a lifetime to go through those experiences. You've gone through that very early in life.
That's right.
To understand what happened to you, what you did, why you did, I need you to go back to the 90s, simply because I think that must have been the most formative period of your
Correct.
thought process and what happened when you turned very critical against the political establishment. So let's go back to your life in Kashmir in the 90s to understand where you came from, what happened, what was childhood like. So go back to the background.
I mean, I grew up in a broken home in a conflict zone. So I think that's not easy for anybody. Especially for me, watching my mother, get beaten up and face domestic violence on a routine basis. It certainly makes you angry. It makes you very sensitive to issues of injustice or perceived injustice. So you are what you can call me. I mean, I call myself a precocious politician. It's never too late for politics in India, but we were in some kind of hurry to, enter politics very fast. So I've done a kind of internship in politics, a 3 months internship in politics, during which I learned and unlearned a lot of things. But going back where it started from, why I was so sensitive to issues of injustice or perceived injustice, is because of what you witness at home, what you witness all around you, and of course the power of narrative, I would say. I mean,
Before we come to the power of narrative, tell me a little bit about your locality, where you lived, what were your neighbors, and you say that your mother faced physical abuse
Yeah.
at the hands of your father.
Yeah.
She was a government servant, if I
Yes,
wasn't
yes.
mistaken. She
Yeah.
retired from government
Yeah.
service. So at that time, did you and your sister, you're the only two sisters,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Did you seek help? Did your mother seek help? She was an empowered woman
Yeah.
at the workplace.
Yeah.
Why did she take the beating? Was there any family help? Could you give me a little
We lived in joint family, and it was in downtown Srinagar, which has been the hub of insurgency, and it's also where the Kashmiri Pandits. I mean, before I was born or before I could come to my senses, there used to be a lot of Kashmiri Pandits. So there used to be a lot of this narrative around ki all the good teachers are gone, like
Because the Pandits were the
Pandits
teachers.
used to be the good, the better teachers. So I think we never had a the generations before us, they were really good at math, really good at grammar, and they owed it to those people. So it was a lot of like we've seen encounters, we've heard firing. There's that one incident where my sister, she was holding a pot of curd, like a clay pot, and there was a firing, there was a gunshot in the background, and it just fell from her hand. And to this date, like all of my friends, whenever we are at a party, Diwali party, say for example, there are crackers. So my friends, they don't get stunned. I get stunned very easily. So I think pretty much everyone in Kashmir suffers from PTSD. And when you combine that with if there are problems at your own home, There weren't a lot of institutional mechanisms. As you know, the PWDVA Act, it has come only in 2005, the Domestic Violence Act, which is a good act, but it has come only in 2005. It wasn't there before. So there weren't a lot of mechanisms for us to, seek help. But there is this paradox of sorts almost, where women who are submissive and they are dependent on their husbands and they are homemakers, they actually, I don't want to undermine their struggles or anything, but they actually have it easier in a sense, because when you are working, you are expected to work, and then you are also expected to work at home, and then you are also expected to contribute financially. So it's like having two full-time jobs. So my mother, while she worked at the hospital, she was in the essential services. She's never taken a day off. But at the same time, when she would come home, so she would have to do all of this and then also put up with other things. So I think that I discuss this with my cousins quite often, that, why are working women facing more domestic violence? That's something of a, phenomenon. Because
So you saw your mother being, pardon me for saying this, but you saw your mother being beaten by your dad?
Yes, in fact, like I remember one incident, like when she confronted him over something. He hit her so hard that she left, in her left ear, she partially lost hearing. And that is a very traumatized upbringing. And then you have a trauma response to everything. So the moment you see some injustice, you just cannot stand it. You cannot stand back. You need to intervene. So even if it's some kind of, someone is beating up somebody else on the street side, you just can't hold yourself back. You want to intervene in that thing because it's so personal to you, so you develop that kind of, whether you call it sensitivity or trauma response, whatever you want to call it.
And you talked about your neighborhood. I've been to that neighborhood.
Yeah.
I've seen those locked homes of Kashmiri Pandits.
Right.
And I've also known friends who left from that area and their home was then occupied. Some kind of similar stories I've heard from family members who occupied homes of, partition victims. I mean, those who
Right.
left India and went to Pakistan,
Yeah.
and their homes were given to.
Yeah.
So those kind of stories, and it's probably wrong to draw parallels because Pakistan became another country. Here
Right.
it wasn't another country.
Yeah.
Here it was a
Internally
refugee.
displaced,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was. So it's a complicated kind of a story. Did you have friends who were Kashmiri Pandits in your neighborhood?
No, not really. We grew up in a pretty homogenous setup, because by the time we came to census, I think it was a completely Muslim population. But my parents' generation, yeah, they talk about it a lot. They had Pandit friends, but no, we didn't.
So growing up in the 90s, what was your surrounding like? It was, did you completely believe in the narrative that it was oppression by the center on Kashmir?
So earlier we didn't understand it. The censorship was at a very high level. So even though you saw things around you, you didn't talk about it at the dinner table. So for example, there was an
So
encounter.
it was a personally put censorship, right? I mean, there was no...
Yeah, I think the
Because
parents
Kashmiri
were
media
afraid of
was-
exposing the children to the conflict narrative. And even though it was all around, and that's the, sort of stunning thing about it, that there's an encounter happening. And there was something called a Mandir school. So where the locality where I come from, it's called Sona Masjid. And there is a Raghunath Mandir over there. It's a really large, it's a grand temple. But after the Pandits left, I believe it must have been deserted, and nobody was taking care of it. So the insurgents will often take shelter over there, and there used to be a school run from the premises. So even though there were these very clear, sort of indications or remnants of the past, so to speak, we never really talked about it. It was never discussed. The conflict, everything. At least in my home, it wasn't discussed. So maybe the parents didn't want us to be exposed to that narrative. And it wasn't until 2010 that my generation became aware of the conflict in a very immediate sense as to what is, happening. Like before that, we knew like there's something going on, but we started talking about only in 2010.
But you saw the militants openly.
Yeah.
You saw all that
Yeah,
happening.
yeah.
But when you say that parents didn't talk about it, but it was obvious all around you
Yes.
that militants. So in the 90s, India almost lost Kashmir, right? It was almost like it was talked about whether Kashmir can still be a part of India or not. That was the conversation which was happening around the world. And you were growing up in Kashmir. Did you did you believe in the Azadi narrative at that time?
Oh, we had no idea. I mean, there was one instance where my deceased Khala, she passed away in 2020. So she had an incident. We were very small at that time. She was walking through the Palladium lane and there was a bomb blast over there. And her, I think, right arm was nearly severed and it was saved by a very miraculous surgery. But even then, despite all of this, at least in my family, it wasn't discussed. There was some kind of censorship where, it was probably so explosive a topic that we didn't talk about it. Despite, for 4 years she was in recovery. Her arm, it was like it took a lot of time to get back to normal. But we never talked about the conflict. And it's really the, street protests of 2008, 9 and 10 that really sort of give us an awareness that there is even a conflict. So till then there was no, I can speak for myself at least. There was no awareness of the conflict.
So what happened in 2010? For you and in Kashmir, because there are many viewers and listeners, Shehla, who tune in, who live abroad. They are this post-conflict generation, right? Who are not aware of what happened in 2010. Instead of me giving an explainer, tell the audience from your perspective.
So these years of 2008, 9 and 10, which saw summer protests over one issue or the other. 2008 was the Amarnath land row. 2009 was the Asia Nilofer incident, and 2010 it started with the Machil encounter, and afterwards, the killing of a teenager. So there were a lot of summer, 3 summers of protest, you can say. And the media used to describe it as not just a protest but a siege, because everything was shut. There were street protests, young boys, and I think it was a break from the 90s insurgency where young boys or young men, they had taken up guns. These people, they weren't armed. They were throwing stones at, whatever the signs of the establishment, at the armed forces, police, whatever. And then, the response was bullets. So a lot of people were killed in 2010, almost 110 people, young boys, and including one girl, they were killed. So all of us started to think, oh, what's happening? Because these people were of our age. And I used to think at that time...
You were in school then?
I was in college. And I used to discuss with my friends, what if I weren't a girl? Because girls are more protected. But what if I weren't a girl? Would I have gone out in these protests? And, would I have been a part of those? So there was a lot of immediate awareness of the conflict. And you can say all of my college years, 2007 to 11, 3 of those years were simply lost. The academic calendar was simply...
What were you
lost
studying?
To. I did my engineering from NIT Srinagar, computer science engineering. And 3 out of those 4 years were simply gone, because of the protests and everything. And initially we used to think, oh, why are these people doing it? Why are they going out on the streets? Why are they creating this havoc? But 2010 was really when when the civilian casualties...
why are people... So in your mind and between you friends, were you blaming the protesters or were you blaming the establishment?
It started with blaming the protesters in 2008. Of course, I'm probably speaking from a privileged perspective and all of that. It started with blaming the protesters. But in 2010, there was a Jat agitation somewhere in Haryana, and they also threw stones at the police. And there was no, the retaliatory action was not in the form of bullets, or pellets was much later, bullets or whatever, that wasn't done against them. And that, I think, that really made me think, why is this sort of dual treatment of Kashmiris, or, why are they human? The human rights narrative became very strong because, young, unarmed. I mean, they were armed with stones, but, technically not having guns.
You never
and all
took
of
part
that.
in any stone pelting?
No, it's all boys. It's girls have a much more protected life in Kashmir.
But there are girls who took part and threw stones too.
I think that was much later. Around 2016, I think that phenomenon started, as far as I remember. In 2010, there was only one girl who was looking out of her window and she got shot and she was killed. That also is, a turning point in the minds of many people. But yeah, as a girl, you have a much more protected life in Kashmir. Boys have it, they're much more exposed to those things.
So your sympathies were with the stone pelters at that stage?
In 2010, yes. I mean, the thing that we were saying is that the retaliatory action should not be so violent, people should not be killed. And that is part of, what like our main issue at that time was human rights. That was the narrative.
So among you students, what did you think would be an acceptable retaliation to stone pelters who were hitting at the forces at that time? What would have been a perfect...
I mean, the state has a lot of things at its disposal. Say there
what
is
was
the
the
use of
conversation?
water
Water
cannons,
cannons, okay.
and all of that. Yeah, like that. But really, what it took, I mean, if we now
It
take
was Omar Abdullah who was the chief minister at that time, I
I
think,
believe
right?
so, but it's no different. Like 2016, it was the PDP government, I
PDP.
believe, and same kind of response.
They
So-
used water cannons with colored water at that stage.
Yes, yes.
That angered many people because if those kids are going to come back home in colored clothes, and then they'll be identified by the cops when the Shinakt parade is done. So that was the anger. So water cannon was used, but even that was criticized.
You're right.
Right?
Yeah.
And as far as the pellet guns were concerned, that was the option which I think Kashmir used as opposed to the
bullets. Live bullets,
yeah. So it was a crowd control that had worked in Israel, and that was a technology which was adopted in Kashmir at that stage. Am I right in saying
And
this?
there were a lot of people at that time who were drawing parallels to the Intifada of, the Gaza.
Correct.
But today when I see, I'm much more grateful for today's situation, because today it has become clear that Kashmir is not Gaza. And what it has really taken is a political will. Somebody had to break this ice. Somebody had to break the stalemate, because Kashmir was just involved in this back and forth of protests and, sporadic incidents of insurgency, infiltration, all of those things. Somebody needed to break the ice. And for that, I would like to credit the present government, especially the Prime Minister, the Home Minister. They've ensured a political solution to it, which is, I would say, bloodless. And at a time when we are talking about, when the world is talking about civilian casualties in Gaza, I mean, you have to credit the establishment in Kashmir that there have been zero civilian casualties, since 2009, since the abrogation in the last 5 years. There have been zero civilian casualties in police action. And the abrogation, we were all up in arms. I went to Supreme Court.
Let's bring up the tweet on the screen which Shehla had made, in which I'm quoting, "Looking at the events in Middle East today, I realize how lucky we are as Indians. The Indian Army and security forces have sacrificed everything for security. Credit where it's due." And then you tag PMO India, HMO, which is Home Ministry, Manoj Sinha, who's the
LG.
Lieutenant Governor, ADGPI, which is the Army, and Chinar Corps of the Indian Army, which is in Kashmir for bringing peace to Kashmir. I'm just reading it out because there will be some who don't know what IDGPI is, those who are not on social media all that much, on Twitter. So you said this when you were looking, and it brings me back to that period of the Intifada. I had even written about that at that stage, because I was, there was this romanticism among the youth in Kashmir about Intifada, right? And everybody wearing the scarf and walking around, and you're seeing similar kind of visuals which are coming in rest of the world. Strangely enough, it's not happening in Kashmir. What do you think is happening? Why?
There are various aspects to this. The first aspect is that the present government, the government of India, they have started treating Kashmir not just as a security problem, but as a political problem. Because of Article 370 and 35A, there was this sense that we are separate. We have our separate constitution. We have a separate flag. For whatever it was worth, we may not be getting the facilities that people in the rest of India are getting. We may not be getting the same kind of treatment. But even then, there was this kind of, sense that we are separate or we are special or whatever it is. And it wasn't really serving any purpose, but people held on to it closely. Some people, I mean, of course, people who are pro-Azadi, they see it like as a red herring or something. They don't really consider it that precious. But those people who believed in the electoral process, etc., they held it as precious. They held it, people like myself, we used to say that, this is a sign of federalism, and federalism is good. It is within the ambit of the Indian constitution. But I think that, it is of course a consequentialist kind of yardstick that I'm applying here. It has served to end the psychological duality, this identity crisis, this hesitation to, say, are you an Indian or are you a Kashmiri? It has ended that thing. And that is one aspect of it. Like,
It's
it has
ended?
been...
Almost.
Today you see these young children. They are going to the Republic Day parade, Independence Day parade. I think I'd written on Independence
Yes.
Day. They are participating in the festivities. Now, our generation, it was unthinkable that we would participate in the festivities of August 15th organically, right?
But your mother did.
Yes, their generation did. Yeah, in fact, like they used to go to the Republic Day parades and all of that. And it was
Your mother's generation went for the Republic Day parade.
yeah, like my mother, I think, in fact, she went for the Republic Day parade in Delhi, and that was something that was unthinkable for our generation. So, I mean, if we have to live here in India and we have to live peacefully, then it was necessary to end this politically, this identity crisis, to deal with it politically. So I think that credit to the present establishment for not treating Kashmir just as a law and order problem and security problem, because it was not. I think they managed to correctly diagnose, touchwood, I hope I'm not speaking too soon, they managed to correctly diagnose the problem that this, it was giving a boost to a separatist kind of feeling, I would say, this separate flag, separate constitution, and, for whatever it was worth, it may or may not be serving our purpose, but it was there. So that's one. The second thing that is happening, the second important thing that's happening right now is that there is a congruence between Delhi and the state administration. There is a clarity as to what the objectives are. There is a clarity as to how to deal with the situation. There is no confusion. A lot of steps that the administration takes, a lot of steps that the state takes to end, to deal with the security situation, whether it's detentions or it's arrests or whatever cases, or even calibrated negotiations, whatever the steps are, there is no confusion. There is excellent synergy between the various security forces and even between security forces and the police right now. And the most important thing, now here's where I come in, and someone like me who has been vocal about human rights, who's been sensitive to this issue, our main ask was that civilian killings should not happen, right? They've not happened, as a matter of fact. The civilian killings, and in fact the security operations, they are done in a way so as to minimize the collateral damage and civilian killings. Plus, the Honorable LG administration, they've also ensured that wherever such lapses happen, there has been action against cops, there has been action against security forces. The Amshipura fake encounter, you might have heard about it in Shopian. There was a court-martial and an army man was sentenced to life for that. So these kind of, so if I had to describe the present administration, I mean, I have to credit, Mr. Manoj Sinha, his administration, the Lieutenant Governor. If I had to describe their 3 years in office in 3 words, I would say peace, accountability, and integrity. Recruitments are happening at a fast pace. I've qualified for the post of assistant professor, and there were 27 or 28 posts. And I don't remember the last time that, so many posts were filled. And in the last less than 2 years, I have appeared for the civil services preliminary examination at the state level, at the UT level, thrice. Less than 2 years, 3 prelims exams. That's faster than even UPSC. So recruitments are happening, and when I did not qualify, but when the interviews concluded at 2:30 p.m. on the day the previous result was declared, at 8:30 p.m. Within 6 hours, the result was made public.
Did you feel any discrimination when you were taking the exam?
I cannot allege any discrimination because I have been treated on merit and I have topped every entrance exam that I have qualified. I have just topped the assistant professor exam in sociology. So I cannot allege any discrimination.
Even at interview phase?
No, I got my interview went really well. I was asked to give a demo class and I got 11 out of 12 in the interview. So yeah, there is no discrimination.
Nobody asked you that, pardon me for saying this, but nobody said, weren't you part of the Tukde-Tukde gang?
No. Nobody told me that. I was judged on my academic...
Did you expect that kind of a question?
I did, because I had earlier given a few interviews at the Kashmir University, etc. And yeah, that did come up. But the thing is that recruitments are happening at a record pace, and they're happening in a very transparent manner. When you're declaring the result within 6 hours of the conclusion of the interview, there's no scope for manipulation of that.
Okay.
And I think for that you have to credit the LG administration. And I'm speaking just as a commoner. I'm not a spokesperson of any party. I don't hold a brief for anybody. Just as a common candidate who has given 3 civil services exams, who's given, I appeared in the UPSC exam, I appeared in the assistant professor exam. So just as a common person, I'm telling you what I see. There is infrastructural development, which you can see very visible. It's very visible. There is a palpable perception of security. People can move around freely. If you come to Srinagar, there is the Jhelum riverfront. You can actually now see people taking a walk on that, like locals taking a walk. I don't like to say, people, whenever they are asked how the situation in Kashmir is improving, they'll say tourism. It's not just about tourism. For the locals now, there are, avenues. When we were growing up, we didn't have anything to do. Like our school would not take us for picnics because security situation. We did not have any avenues for sports. There was no cinema. There was no play area. Now there are all those things.
Didn't you as a kid ask this question of your mom? Like there are children who, there are Kashmiris I've spoken to, I've had friends of course, who bought into the separatist narrative.
Yeah.
They would go to Bangalore, they would go to restaurants, bars, pubs in Chennai, in Bangalore, not so much in Delhi because they are recognized in Delhi. They would do all this in these cities. And when I would ask them that if you can do this here, don't you ask that why can't you have cinemas? Why can't you have Bollywood? Why can't you have cinemas? Nahi, wahan nahi ho sakta.
Yeah. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head. All of us, we have sort of 2 lives. We have dual lives as Kashmiris. Outside we'll go to cinema hall, but in Kashmir we'll think that, if we go to the cinema hall, what if there is an attack? What if there is a bomb blast or something? It is a real fear. I haven't gone to the cinema hall in Kashmir just yet, but a lot of people are going.
Yeah.
But yes, there was always this fear. When we are in Delhi, we don't think twice about going to the cinema hall. But yes, in Kashmir, it's an issue. It's not just a decision, chalo chalte hain, gaadi nikal ke chalte hain. It's not that simple.
You can't even, there were no beauty.
It's almost an ideological decision to go to the cinema hall.
You remember Duktarani Millat and what they did
yes.
to the beauty salons in Kashmir. You must have been in school at that time when it happened.
Guess, yeah.
It happened in the 90s, school, college or whatever. You were at that stage where they just stopped. That happened then. But it also went on for so many years. It went on for decades that, if there were Kashmiri girls who were working in call centers or whatever, their pals would go to get a massage done, a foot massage done. But if they were seen, then they were slapped.
And
beaten up. And whether in the street or whether at home, that why are you doing this? वो tourist हैं, वो बाहर से आए हैं, वो कर सकते हैं. तुम यहाँ की हो, तुम ये नहीं कर सकती हो. So that discrimination, while you talk of censorship and discrimination by the state, this was self-imposed discrimination which was happening.
Absolutely. It's things that you do to survive. You don't want to get caught up in a, sort of like vigilante incident. And you're right. If we oppose vigilantism in the rest of the country, we must oppose vigilantism in our state. It's just that, we often make this demand of civilians that why don't you condemn terrorism? Why don't you condemn Duktarana Millat? It actually doesn't matter what we do, because the state needs to have the will to take action, to take some bold actions. And for that, I really congratulate. I am, really impressed by how the government of India has handled the whole Kashmir situation. Because, I used to think that I've said a lot of things about the BJP, I've said a lot of things about the PM, the HM. But look at them, they've taken so much criticism domestically. Internationally, India has been castigated for the abrogation, but they took all that criticism on them. And it doesn't make sense to me why somebody would, make such a risky, unpopular, whatever you want to call it, decision. And I've arrived at one conclusion, which is what caused my change of heart also. I've realized that the Honorable Prime Minister, the Home Minister, they are really selfless people who only care about the national interest. No matter how much, I know how much criticism we've made of the government, how much criticism the government faced internationally, domestically from the opposition. Why would anyone take so much criticism, if it weren't for the national interest? And it has ended up serving the national interest. And of course, I understand it's not a deontological position, it's a consequentialist position that, now we are judging the actions. But certainly, like, I should not continue to believe that I am the Miss Know-all. Maybe some people, they have a better reading of the situation. They've taken certain steps. And has it resulted in saving of human lives in Kashmir? It has. Has it resulted in progress, development? It has. Has it resulted in us enjoying better freedoms, like now children can go to the play area at the mall? These are very superficial things, but actually they aren't. Now there is sports infrastructure. I mean, there is a Kashmiri in the cricket team, and there are Kashmiris, they're doing very well in the Asian Games. There are so many, athletes
Many
who have
points
performed.
that, yeah.
Yeah. So these are, I mean,
They're not really superficial, no, Shehla?
Yeah, yeah.
Because you talk about trauma of growing up. You didn't have these things which to many people might seem superficial. I
Yeah.
guess the word comes naturally to you
Yeah.
because those are the terms which were used earlier for these things.
Yes, for these things. I mean, also I'm a bookworm. I'm a bit of a bookworm, so I was never involved in any sports. My sister was.
Yeah, but
these are
this is venting of energy. It was the same thing, those kids out on the streets,
Yes.
because they had nothing else to do. Okay, Shehla, let's take a closer look at this timeline of your tweets. Because, the criticism, which I'm sure even before the podcast is aired, it'll be like, oh, you brought Shehla Rashid. Because, there will be, the Kashmiri Pandits will be very annoyed because, you were a vocal supporter of the separatist narrative for some time, especially with the Afzal Guru incident. So there is like a no prisoners taken attitude by a certain section of the right-wing media who are not willing to forgive you for a certain number of
Sure.
tweets that you have done.
Yeah.
It's all right. You don't
Sure.
need to seek forgiveness or anything like
Right.
that. We're human. We are allowed to change of heart. But then they feel that let's get into that later. But, as that it impacted on so many things at that stage. The CA never got, it was never implemented because of various things. You can talk about the fallout quite a bit as to what happened then. But let's talk about what many of them feel is that now that from becoming a Modi critic to becoming a Modi supporter, you've explained how it happened because it was organic, what you say.
Yeah.
But if you see the timeline, and many of them say that, the reason is because the Lieutenant Governor granted prosecution against you, because of your tweets about the army.
Yeah.
And in 2023, you and Shah Faisal, you withdrew pleas against the abrogation of 370.
Yeah.
For our expat viewers and listeners, Shah Faisal is an Indian bureaucrat from Kashmir who resigned from government service in 2019, citing unabated killings in Kashmir. His resignation wasn't accepted and he was reinstated in government service in 2022. But between this period, he, along with Shehla, who's our guest today, formed a political party in Kashmir, and that seems like it was a non-starter. So back to you, Shehla. In August 2023, you started praising the centre and the Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir in particular. You've explained as to how the change of heart happened. What do you say to critics who say that this deeper connection is superficial? To use your word, superficial. That the deeper connection is superficial. It's because of legal issues that you were mired under.
So two things. First of all, I started supporting some of the executive actions in 2020, which is the pandemic year. So at that time, I had supported the lockdown. And because, I hadn't made any overt overtures towards the government or whatever, I was still surrounded by an echo chamber that immediately shut me down. They were like, oh, why are you supporting the government? And it was then that I realized for the very first time in 2020 that a lot of the criticism that we do, a lot of the criticism of the governments is for the sake of it. And that's where I come again to the point of polarization, that just because Mr. Modi is doing something, we have to oppose it.
We bole to Kashmiris
the left liberal ecosystem, opposition, whatever you want to call it, critical, let's just call it, people who are critical of the government.
The echo chamber that you're talking about?
Yes. I was very much part of that echo chamber. Yet, I still saw, in countries like Sweden, etc., where the governments did lock down, people protested against it. They said, no, you cannot lock down because citizens' rights, democracy, etc. And in the US, where the Trump administration did not lock down. Teachers, you must have seen some of the posts by teachers. They were saying, you are sending us to the death row by not shutting down, right? So what was the choice with the government in 2020? To shut down or to not shut down? So I think it was a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for a government. And I feel that the government had no choice but to lock down, right? But there was this entire conspiracy theory around it. There were a lot of conspiracy theories around, the pandemic. Like one of the conspiracy theories was that this is part of some global push for financialization, towards a cashless economy, greater financialization. It's a big corporate. So, British political conspiracy theorist David Icke, like I listened to him also at that time. And he said that this is nothing, COVID is nothing, but it's just a global, sort of conspiracy theory to push financialization. And we used to think in India, and I must admit I'm one of those people who would say that, yeah, this digital is, Digital India is just part of that greater push for financialization. UPI is just part for that, and it's going to help the bigger corporates. But what did I actually see? I mean, I actually conducted fieldwork. And I saw, because my research is on the political experience of digitality in India. And I conducted fieldwork, and I realized that, the evidence on the ground does not support that conspiracy theory that COVID is a push for financialization across the world, etc. It doesn't support that. And UPI is not part of that, because UPI is not helping the bigger corporates, or it is not helping the already creditworthy. It's actually helping build creditworthiness for a population which is hitherto, unbanked. It has helped the greengrocers. It has helped the hawkers, the coconut vendors, the chapri-walas, there's a girl who is, giving this home beauty services during COVID because all the beauty parlors were shut down. It is helping her. So it's actually making our population bankable. It is not comparable to the credit card movement in the West, because the credit card rests on the assumption of, the credit card needs creditworthiness. You can't just get a credit card. That's not the case with UPI. It's not pushing that. It's actually making our population bankable. And this is when, in 2020, this is when I started realizing that some of the things that we say do not add up. So frankly, Smita, I had to give up, those ideologies and those prisms, which neither had explanatory power nor predictive power. So I had to give up those deterministic kind of narratives, which neither had any explanatory power nor predictory power anymore. So I had to give up those kind of discourses, and I had to step outside of the echo chamber, and I had to look at things from my own perspective. Now herein comes my research, because my research is on the political experience of digitality in India. What I found is that there is a big difference between how the political experience of the digital happens in the West and how it happens in India. In the West, it is very well documented by now that there is these algorithms, the algorithmic governance, because, in the West, there is paucity of labor. So the push is on automation of services, which is not the case in India. I mean, you still have a human interface and complete data sets. I'll come to that. But in the West, there is this push for automation because labor is less. And governance, for example, allocation of welfare. I've studied some of these things. So in Britain, some people are just shunted out of the pension system, and there's no way for them to appeal. So what these algorithms are doing in the West is that they are encoding white privilege. And scholars have called it automating inequality. So that's the phrase that is used for it, automation of inequality. So you're just taking existing inequalities, you're putting them in an algorithm, and they're getting automated and they're getting amplified. That's not the case with Digital India, because first of all, our data sets are complete. There is no like racial segregation in India. There's no such thing. The data sets are complete. Everybody has an Aadhaar, and there is no automation, or there is no encoding of privilege. Everybody, the Digital India, I mean, that's been a big part of, why I have sort of exited the echo chamber, so to speak. Digital India is secular. It does not encode any racial or, anti-minority bias. And I can tell you that because I went looking with a microscope. I wanted to extend this, this was my research is in political science. So I wanted to extend this Western narrative of automation of inequality. I wanted to see how it operates in India. I went to these CSCs, the service, the Aadhaar centers and all of that. I interviewed people. I actually looked at instances. Personally speaking, I applied for a domicile certificate post-abrogation. I think I was one of the first people to apply for a domicile certificate because there were so many anxieties that, now our state subject certificates do not hold any value. Now, people from outside will come and they will be given our everything.
Outside bole to outside Kashmir.
Outside Kashmir, yeah. And there were these, fears of a demographic inversion almost, that ab 370 chala gaya, ab bahar ke log aake bas jayenge, inko sab kuch mil jayega. There were
Which
these
is
anxieties.
what, not just the separatist narrative, it was also the narrative which was fueled by the politicians of mainline politicians. We saw this by Mehbooba Mufti, we saw it by Farooq Abdullah, Omar Abdullah, everybody. It was that our lands will be taken away.
Yeah. So that was the general, like everybody, that was the commonsensical. It was a kind of like, thing that everybody says. But what did we actually see? I mean, if you're a rational thinking individual, you have to take an objective view of things. So out of this anxiety, I was one of the first people to apply for a domicile certificate. And voila, I just got my domicile certificate, There was no discrimination based on my political ideology or my faith or whatever. No, there was none. The entire process was automatic. I did not have to supplicate before any political authority or any bureaucrat to get my domicile certificate. And that's also when I realized, oh, okay, so there's no big conspiracy happening here, right? I mean, how many people, the Honorable Home Minister, he also said it in his speech in Srinagar. He said that how many people have come from outside. It's true. Like, he also acknowledged this, that there was this anxiety. And that's when I realized that the digital India, it's not like, the experience of the digital in the West. It's different. The digital India is secular by design. And it does not encode any, anti-minority bias or anything like that. So that's when my research started taking a different direction, because I went to the field with a critical orientation. And what I found was that, India needs to be not castigated, but celebrated for the implementation of digital India, because it has not served the big corporates, etc. Everything works great. So if I use DigiYatra, there's no point for me to romanticize backwardness for other people. I should not be a hypocrite. What I do myself, if I use UPI, I use DigiYatra, I use DigiLocker, then why should I, keep on opposing it? So there was the question of intellectual honesty involved over there. And as I said, this started in 2020. Yes, you talked about this, sanction given by the LG and all of that. I would say to that the political process and the, judicial process, they are different. Our courts are not determined by what is said on social media or, what a politician. Courts are independent. This is not some kangaroo court we are talking about. This is the Indian judiciary. The judiciary and the executive, they are separate. So no, like I
your
would say
commendation, Shehla, it coincided with your sharing of an interview featuring Rais Mattu, the brother of Hizbul terrorist Javed Mattu, and Rais displays the Indian national flag in that video, and you posted it, and he says in an interview that he waved the Tiranga because it was part of his heart, telling him that, and there was no pressure on him. Was there any pressure on you? Because you were saying that it is when you did your research, you got to know and you willingly stepped out of that echo chamber of which you were part. Your critics will say that there was pressure on you by the left wing, because there are people who will not, from both, from those whose company you have left and from those whose company you refuse to be in. Both of them are critical of you to say that you must have come under pressure, otherwise how could you have done this?
There was nobody pressured me. I've been living my life quite peacefully. As I told you, I mean, if there was discrimination, they could have given me a 0 in the interview, or, I could have been barred from the process. There is no pressure on me. I'm living my life normally. Yes, there is the question of what I've said, and, I'm willing to apologize for it, because I relied on second-hand information to say some of these things, even though, I can say a lot of things to contextualize it, that I said good things also about the administration, they were taken out of context, etc. All of that is fine. But as I said, the judicial process and the political process are separate. This is not the People's Republic of China where the judiciary and the executive are one. No. The judicial process will go on separately and this will go on separately. But it's a question of intellectual honesty. It's also a question that, when something good is happening, if good things are happening in Kashmir, what should we do? I mean, you look at the US Congress report recently, there was some report in the US Congress. They are still asking for internet to be restored in Kashmir. Now, you realize how out of touch with reality some of these narratives are. And at the same time, when I said good things about Kashmir, of course, it wasn't without backlash. I understand that. But it's a question of backlash versus intellectual honesty. So should I be worried about the backlash or should I just be honest with myself? There should be some integrity. I mean, there's this black feminist called Bell Hooks. She talks about integrity when there is congruence between your beliefs, thoughts, and action. So as I said, if I am using Digi Yatra, if I am using whatever, UPI, etc. I haven't handled cash in 2 years, I think. So why should I then continue to, hold these I used to be anti-Aadhaar at one point, but why should I hold that view anymore? When I see that it's working perfectly, so I'll give you an example. I talked about Digi Yatra, right? So in the West, there is an entire body of literature on how the facial recognition systems actually exclude Asian, black minorities, and they only encode white privilege. Have we seen such an instance in India? Is there any instance where, somebody from a certain region of India has been not recognized by Digi Yatra? You tell me if there is any such instance. There isn't, actually, because we don't have those problems. We don't have a deeply rooted racism in our country. And I think that the present moment, where we see religious conflict, open religious conflict across the West, across the world, there is confrontation on the streets between Jews and Muslims, between Christians and Jews, whatever. In India, we don't see that. So I think we should take a moment to celebrate our own, deep-rooted secularism instead of looking for Western models of secularism. And I'll be honest enough to say that I'm one of those people who used to
see only discrimination.
Yes, see only discrimination and look at, how great the West is. They have such strong statutory protections. Where are those statutory protections now? There is open anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, whatever, you name it. Everything is out there on the streets. Where are those strong statutory protections?
Because you had said, you were very critical of some BJP politician. I have to put it in context because
Sure.
About the anti-Muslim sentiments regarding conversions. And I'm reading from your tweet, you had written sharpest decline in birth rate among Muslims from 1992 to 1915 to 2015. Also, neither migration nor conversions have had any impact on the religious composition of the country. Conversions are rare in India. It shows you how baseless the ruling party's propaganda is. Your stance has changed since then.
Yeah.
I'm also going to read out what the Minorities Affairs Minister had stated this year as per the population report, a technical group on population projections 2020, July 2020. The National Commission on Population country's projected population in 2023 stands at 138.82 crore. Okay, according to this, applying the same proportion of 14.2% as was the census in 2011, the projected Muslim population in 2023, because there's no census, it would be 19.75 crore. When you have 19.75 crore Muslims, that's like entire country's population.
Correct.
In many places,
Yes,
right?
yes.
In a Hindu majority country, when you have 19.75 crore Muslims,
Yeah.
do you see the kind of discrimination as, say, a New York Times or a Washington Post literally on a weekly basis is putting out?
Yeah.
You don't see a counter narrative happening at all because I guess Indian media is just exhausted. Or Kashmiris or Indian Muslims are exhausted and say, why the hell should we keep saying that, no, there is no discrimination, which you are saying today, that you didn't find any discrimination.
Yeah.
Is it right or is it wrong to expect from the Muslim community to speak out like you have spoken out today, that there is no discrimination in, say, getting an ID card, in going to a pub, in going to a movie hall,
Yeah.
in sitting for the UPSC
Exam,
exam,
yeah.
right? Is it unfair to ask the Muslim population to speak out like you're speaking out today?
So there are 3 or 4 things here. First of all, is there communalism in this country? Yeah, sure. Like 70 years back, we were partitioned on a religious basis. So we cannot say that communalism began when BJP came, or it began in 2014. No, we've been partitioned on religious lines, and it was a very bloody partition. It was not a pretty sight, by all accounts. So yeah, there has been communalism, and there will continue to be communalism. At the same time, the problem with the critical orientation is that we only focus on the negatives. We forget to celebrate the positives. Are there positives? Yes. I mean, scholars of secularism like Professor Rajiv Bhargav, they talk about Indian secularism, and they compare it with the Western. Like Western secularism is rooted in statutes and all of that. But Indian secularism, which is more appropriately called pluralism,
And lived experience.
That is civilizational in nature. So whatever incidents you see, for example, the partition, there is some riot, there is a phase of mob lynchings. So Professor Rajiv Bhargav and other scholars of Indian secularism, they will say that this is a blip on the radar. Our nation will survive, our plurality will survive, because this is in a much longer tradition, because there is a much longer tradition of pluralism, which is different from Western secularism, if you academically analyze it. So our pluralism is much more civilizational, rooted in nature. And that is, when I talk about the present moment, we see that, we don't see the sort of, I'm sorry to use the phrase, but the proverbial clash of civilizations that we are witnessing across the world right now in this moment. We don't actually see it in India because there is no clash of civilizations. It is one civilization. And Dr. Tanveer Fazal, who is a sociologist, he has pointed this out in one of his papers, that Muslims in Delhi, during his fieldwork, he found that they reject this classification of minority, and they say that we are the second largest majority. So the first largest majority being Hindus and the second largest majority. So when you point out that, the Muslim population is going to be so and so, it's correct. Actually, the Muslims themselves, as per academic experts, they classify themselves as the second largest majority.
Where 200 million is what President Murmu said.
Yeah.
So how can 200 million be a minority?
Yeah.
Right? It's a country in itself.
Yeah. We've had communalism, and we will also have pluralism. See, for the next 100 years to come, even if whoever is claiming right now that, BJP is bad, even if I become the Prime Minister, do you think that communalism will go in one day? It will not go. It will stay for hundreds of years to come. That is a reality, because India is a humongous country. And yes, there were incidents of mob lynching. There were some unfortunate statements made against Muslims. Yes, do they hurt you as a Muslim? Yeah, they do. But what do we need to do? I mean, as Muslims, what do we need to do? Do we keep focusing and harping on that narrative, on the negatives? I don't think so, because we've lost years doing that. This is our country as much as, it is anyone else's country. And the Home Minister, when he came to Srinagar, he said that to Kashmiris. He said, this is your country. Go live wherever you want, do whatever you want. These were his exact words. He said that this is my country as much as this is yours. And our country right now, I think we should take a moment to acknowledge that we are living through a historically very important phase. We should be lucky that we are in this country and not anywhere else in the world right now, because there is peace, there is development, and we've just overtaken our former colonizer, the United Kingdom, as the 5th largest economy. And we are headed for the spot of the 3rd largest economy. So when you say what should we expect of Muslims, first of all, I should start with myself. I should myself take responsibility. Have I in the past contributed to the victimhood complex of the Muslims? I may have, some of my statements, because I kept harping on those incidents. I ran a campaign against lynching. So have I contributed to that narrative of victimhood? Maybe. So what is my responsibility right now, and what should be my message to the Muslims of this country? Should it be that भाई यहाँ पे डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है, आप कुछ मत करो, आप घर पे बैठ जाओ, पढ़ाई मत करो, compete मत करो, don't come to public life? I don't think so. That should not be my message. My message should be that development is secular. Our country is headed for greater heights. We are literally reaching for the moon and beyond. And at this time, we may need to ignore some noise. There is the election coming up. Someone will say something. We will have to behave as a model minority, which like the Indian American community is called, usually the model minority. We'll have to ignore some of the noise because that noise is meant to distract us. And we will have to focus on how we can contribute to the development of this great nation.
Why is it that Kashmiris could not ignore that narrative which came in from Pakistan at that stage? Because a lot of it was, the Azadi was fueled by prime ministers, presidents, army chiefs of Pakistan for decades together, that you can never be part of the Indian mainstream. You're a Muslim majority state, you're an Indian Muslim, you don't belong. And that was swallowed hook, line and sinker by Kashmiris. At what point of time, as a Kashmiri, living in Kashmir and outside Kashmir in rest of India, you've lived in both places.
Right.
As a Kashmiri, where do you think that narrative faltered, and where did you see that narrative didn't click anymore in Kashmir?
I was born, in the 90s, and I've read Wajahat Habibullah's book. And it's not just a question of narrative in Kashmir. He has clearly pointed out, being a former senior bureaucrat himself, he has clearly pointed out that there was a mishandling of the Kashmir situation, just to serve the interests of certain people or certain parties. The national interest or the Kashmir interest was sort of held hostage to those things. And the inflection point, everybody in Kashmir will tell you this, I'm sure you've heard it during your visits. The inflection point was really the, rigging of the 1987 elections, because Pakistan had been extending arms support 20 years prior. The border was almost porous before that, it wasn't even so fortified. Pakistan had been extending arms support. People didn't take it for 20 years, the Ziaul Haq administration and all of that. But in what changed in 1987? It was a mishandling, it was a rigging of the elections. It was like the total, Wajahat Habibullah has written in his book in great detail, because I wasn't born then, so I don't know. But these were the people who had actually wanted to contest elections. They were the ones who took up arms. They were the ones, people who would have been MLAs otherwise. They crossed the border and they took up arms after that, right? So now the present government, what they are doing right is that they are investing in grassroots democracy. Because if it is a failure of democracy, that was the inflection point in, actually fueling the insurgency. Then what the present government is doing right now in building institutions, in ensuring that there's grassroots democracy, in ensuring that the process, the institutions work for everyone equally without discrimination, I think that is an investment in peace. And I hope I'm right. I hope I'm not speaking too soon, so I would say touch wood, I'm a little superstitious. But yeah, these things I think will make everyone stakeholders in peace. I think the problem earlier was that there were very few stakeholders in the political process, in the electoral or democratic process, whatever you want to call it. And now there are around, 30,000 panchayat members, at all levels combined. So there are more stakeholders in peace. And another important thing that the government is doing, earlier, Panch, Sarpanch, they would be routinely attacked by insurgents or infiltrators from Pakistan. They would be routinely, victims of terrorist incidents. But that is not happening now. Now the state is standing behind. The state is actually backing its representatives.
In your years as a student activist, whether in Delhi or when you were in Kashmir, you didn't buy into the Pakistani narrative of separatism?
Pakistan is not even a sort of reference point in, whatever questions I've raised as an Indian citizen. When I was a kid, before I had any awareness of this conflict, I memorized the Jan Gan Man myself. I learned how to sing it. I would, draw the map of India. I would memorize where every state is. I would draw the national flag.
And Kashmir was part of India in the map.
There was no conflict. In my diary, I had written a book-length thing in my 8th grade that what are the problems